I was 18 when my life exploded like a hidden landmine under my feet. Just a moment ago, I was still recovering from a breakup, healing my broken heart with late-night ice cream and quiet playlists. And then my phone vibrated with a message that tore a girl's world to pieces. It was from Mia, not even a friend, just a girl from school who loved chaos more than oxygen. Girl, your video is everywhere, literally everywhere. At first, I didn't understand video. I didn't film anything. Then my heart sank. Jake, my ex. The boy I thought I loved. The boy I thought I loved. I opened the link she sent and couldn't breathe. It was a private moment. I never gave permission for it to be made public. We filmed it when everything was good, when I was stupid and in love. Now the whole world had seen it. My parents have always been like that, offering zero support or understanding. I was their failed child, and they didn't care about my state. My father didn't defend me or put my ex in his place. He blamed me entirely. And Jake? He just liked 2 comments under the video, funny emojis I couldn't stop shaking. I threw up twice before I told anyone about it. But it didn't matter, because by the time I had the courage to ask for help, it was too late. My sister, Allison, was the first to take action. She didn't come to check on me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even look at me. She sent the video, a video of her own sister, straight to our parents, without warning, without compassion, just, "You have to see what Chloe has done. We can't let this tarnish our name." Our name, as if I were a broken vase, with the family crest carved into my skin. As if I weren't her sister, just a disgrace that needed to be dealt with. Dad came home early that day. The door slammed so hard that photos fell off the wall in the hallway. He didn't even wait for me to say anything. "What the hell is this, Chloe?" he roared, waving his phone in the air like a priest condemning a demon. "Dad, I didn't. He posted it. I didn't." "You took that shit," he spat. "You gave it to him. What did you think would happen? That no one would find out? That it wouldn't destroy us all?" I tried to explain, my voice shaking. "I didn't think. I trusted him. Oh, don't play the victim," he snapped. "You spread your legs and now you want pity?" His words hit me harder than anything Jake had ever done. Deeper than the video, the whispers, the insults, the laughter. Because this was my father. My own father, looking at me like I was trash that had been blown in from the street. And my mother? She stood behind him, staring at the floor. She didn't say a word. She never once met my gaze. I begged them. I said I didn't know he was going to post it. That I felt sick, that I was scared. Dad didn't care. "I don't want a whore living in this house," he said in a cold voice. "Dad!" I tried to reach out to him, but he stepped back as if my touch burned him. "You think they'll take you to college now?" he hissed. "You think employers won't see this? You've ruined your future. You've ruined ours." I looked at my mom, my last hope, but her lips were pressed tightly together. She was clutching the edge of her sweater, as if it was the only thing keeping her standing. She didn't say a word. He didn't give me time to pack my things. He just pointed to the door and said, "Get out." So I did. I grabbed my old backpack, still half-packed from our trip to my grandmother's last month, and stuffed in some thin clothes, underwear, a toothbrush, my phone, my charger, my trembling hands. And I walked out into the night. No shoes, no coat, no plan, just the quiet whisper of the front door closing behind me. I spent the first night in Bella's car. She didn't even ask questions. Just pulled up outside the gas station, where I'd ended up wandering after my father threw me out. When she saw me sitting on the curb, knees scraped and eyes hollow, she opened the passenger door and said, "Get in." The car smelled like cinnamon gum and cheap cologne. Her little brother had used it for a road trip the week before, and the back seat was still littered with fast food wrappers and a sleeping bag. I crawled into the blanket nest like a stray animal and cried myself to sleep. I stayed there for a week. We told her parents I was crashing for a while because of family stuff. Bella didn't ask for details, but her glances said she knew. Everyone knew. The whole school had seen it. Of course they had. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes, sweating through my shirt, hearing Jake's voice from that video echo in my mind. I couldn't eat. I couldn't even cry after the second day. Just floated in limbo. An abandoned girl in a borrowed car, invisible and loud at the same time. On the seventh day, Bella found me lighting matches behind the old theater near her neighborhood. "What are you doing?" she asked, worried but not surprised. "Nothing," I said. "Or maybe everything." She left a 20 in my pocket and walked away. The next morning, I bought a one-way bus ticket to a city I'd never heard of. I chose it because it had the longest name on the list and sounded like no one I knew had ever been there. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I took the last remnants of my old life in a canvas bag, a notebook with recipes my mom taught me when she still kissed my forehead goodnight, old postcards from summer camp, a doodle-covered letter from Allison when we were still close, and the birthday card my dad once gave me with the words, "My little star." On the bus, I sat by the emergency exit. The window next to me was scratched and foggy. I pulled out the notebook and flipped through its pages. Chicken soup stains, my fifth-grade poem about space, drawings of constellations I thought were magical, pressed flowers from my grandmother's garden. Every page felt like a betrayal. I opened the emergency latch just enough to feel the cold wind slice through. I struck a match and held the flame under the corner of the notebook. It hesitated, like it knew what I was doing. Then it caught. I fed it page by page into a metal coffee can I'd stuffed in my bag for this exact moment. The pages curled and blackened. The ink turned to smoke. The flowers crackled. The glue from the photos sizzled. I watched my childhood turn into ash. My memories, my names, my good girl mask. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the can was full of gray ghosts. I poured them out by a rest stop and watched the wind take them. I had nothing now. No home. No name I could wear without shame. No version of me that hadn't been mocked, watched, condemned. But nothing, this nothing, was finally mine. It was quiet and empty and terrifying, but also wide. For the first time in 18 years, no one was watching me. No one expected anything. I didn't have to smile on cue or apologize for being inconvenient. I was Chloe. Or maybe not. Maybe someone knew. I pulled my hoodie tighter around me and leaned my forehead against the window. Trees blurred past, green bleeding into gold, into dusk, into night. I didn't know where I was going, but I wasn't going back. Denver was not a place I dreamed about. I didn't arrive chasing a fresh start or new beginnings. I arrived because it was the only city on the departures board I hadn't heard a single thing about. That was the only qualification I needed. The city greeted me with a breath of sharp wind and the sour scent of diesel. It was late afternoon, but the light was already thin. The air pressed down like it knew I didn't belong. I wandered the streets until my legs went numb, dragging my cheap duffel over broken sidewalks, through alleyways full of forgotten furniture, and the distant echo of barking dogs. I found the dormitory by accident. A faded sign tilted sideways above the rusted door. Rooms. Weekly, cash only. That was all I had. Some cash in my backpack, and a desperate craving to disappear. The man at the desk didn't ask for ID, didn't even blink when I lied and said my name was Claire. He handed me a key and grunted something about keeping to myself. Room 17 had peeling wallpaper, a mattress that sagged in the middle like a broken promise, and a single chair bolted to the floor. The window didn't lock, but it barely opened anyway. Someone before me had scratched "I was here" into the wall. That was the only note of permanence. It was perfect. I started working the next morning. Job 1. Waitress at a greasy diner on Colfax. The uniform was 2 sizes too big and smelled like onions. My name tag said Amy, because that's what the manager yelled the first time he saw me. I didn't correct him. Every night, I poured stale coffee into chipped mugs, dodged wandering hands, and smiled like it didn't burn. One customer left a $5 tip with a note that said, "You'd be pretty if you smiled more." I used it to buy dish soap and socks. Job 2. cleaning offices downtown after hours. The pay was terrible, but I liked the solitude. There was something oddly sacred about empty buildings. No voices, no judgment. Just me, my bucket, and the rhythm of repetition. Wipe, scrub, sweep. I once found a leftover birthday cake in a break room fridge with a single slice left. I took it. Didn't even feel guilty. Job 3. Data entry for a dental clinic. It was mindless and repetitive, but it came with a desk and a heater under my feet. I spent hours entering patient notes, pretending I was just another face in the system. Someone with a life, a family, a dog at home waiting. Sometimes I forgot I wasn't that girl. Then I'd glance at my reflection in the computer screen and remember. I was always tired, not just physically. Tired in a way that settled deep in my bones, like rust. But I kept going. At night, when the world went quiet, I wrote. Not anything normal. I didn't journal my feelings like some teenage diary entry. I couldn't bear to read my own thoughts in plain words. So I invented a code. A secret language of symbols, abbreviations, and broken grammar. A place where my shame had no voice, and my memories had to fight to be seen. A1, D3 meant my sister sent the video to Dad. Wine, silence meant Mom still hasn't called. QR 13.9 meant I cried in the office bathroom again. Every entry was short, jagged, and encrypted. It was my therapy, my confessional, my evidence. I hid the notebook under a loose floorboard. If anyone ever found it, they'd think it was nonsense. But to me, it was the only place I was still alive. No one in Denver knew who I was. And for now, that was the best gift the city gave me. Anonymity. The freedom to be invisible. I stopped answering to Chloe. That name didn't belong to me anymore. That girl had been dragged into the spotlight, humiliated, judged, erased. I didn't need her. Instead, I built a routine. Wake at 5 a.m., boil water for instant oatmeal, walk to the diner in the dark, serve tables until noon, quick shower, change clothes in the diner's bathroom, bus downtown, mop floors, wipe desks, then off to the clinic for the night shift, type until my fingers ached, walk home, lock the door, tape the window shut, write, sleep, repeat. No parties, no friends, no days off. But there was something pure about it. I owned every moment of my exhaustion. No one could take credit for the blisters on my heels or the calluses on my palms. I was surviving, quietly, dignified, without anyone's permission. Sometimes, when the city was quiet and my shift ended early, I would sit on the fire escape outside room 17 with a stale sandwich and a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I'd watch people through their windows, couples arguing over dinner, a man practicing guitar, a little girl dancing in pajamas. Their lives looked whole, messy but intact, and I would whisper to myself, they don't know me. They can't ruin me. I didn't have much. But I had that, and someday I would have more. The clinic was always quiet on Thursdays, the kind of quiet that made every keyboard tap sound like a thunderclap. I was halfway through logging patient files when I noticed her, the woman sitting in the corner of the waiting room, knees pressed together, hands trembling in her lap. She looked young, maybe 25, though the fear in her eyes aged her. She wore a nurse's scrubs top and jeans, but they didn't match. Her shoes were 2 different sizes. No one else seemed to notice her. I did. She didn't sign in. She didn't approach the desk. She just sat there, still as glass, watching the door. It was the 3rd time I saw her that week. I brought her a bottle of water and whispered, "Are you okay?" She flinched but nodded. Her accent was thick when she spoke. Wait. He say, maybe I see doctor today. I nodded, even though I knew no appointment was scheduled. 10 minutes later, a uniformed police officer entered the lobby. He wasn't smiling. He went straight to the desk. "I'm looking for Rosa Delgado," he said, flipping through a notebook like it was a script. I didn't even think. "She's not here," I said flatly, before the receptionist could speak. He frowned. "You sure? This is the address listed." I stood up, my heart hammering. Yes. She canceled her appointment last minute. Maybe tomorrow. He narrowed his eyes, looked past me. You seem nervous. Can I see your ID? I'm just a temp, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I don't even work directly for the clinic, but HIPAA laws mean you can't be in here asking about patients. So, unless you have a warrant? His jaw clenched. Right, he muttered. I'll be back. He left. I waited until the door clicked shut before I turned around. The woman, Rosa, was crying silently. Her body curled inward like a closing flower. I helped her out the back. She was undocumented, a nurse from El Salvador who had fled domestic abuse and was trying to get legal status through an asylum claim. Her ex had reported her to ICE out of spite. She kept saying, "Thank you, you lie for me." But the truth was, it wasn't a lie. It was the first honest thing I'd done for another person in months. The next day, someone showed up at the clinic looking for me. She wasn't a cop. She was small, with sharp eyes, and a clipboard filled with flyers. Her name was Liana Reyes, and she ran a local human rights nonprofit that helped protect undocumented workers and immigrants. You've made some waves, she said with a grin. The officer filed a complaint, but we've dealt with worse. Rosa told us what you did. Not many people would have risked their job for a stranger. I didn't know what to say. My instinct was to shrink, apologize, disappear again. But then she added, "You should come to a meeting. We could use someone with your nerve." That night, I walked home lighter. For the first time since the video, since being thrown out, since becoming nothing, I had done something that wasn't a mistake. Something that didn't earn me a slap, a silence, or a locked door. I protected someone, and someone saw me do it. Not to shame me, not to expose me, but to thank me. It didn't fix everything. I still worked 3 jobs. I still wrote in my coded diary. I still woke up some mornings unable to breathe from the weight of it all. But now, sometimes, people knocked on my door because they needed me, because they'd heard what I did. Rosa started volunteering at the nonprofit. We had lunch together once a week. She called me her angel. And even though I hated the word, I didn't correct her. I wasn't an angel. But maybe, just maybe, I wasn't broken anymore either. At first, I only made coffee. That's how you start at any nonprofit. On your feet, with hot hands and quiet patience. The migration NGO was nothing like the cold offices I used to clean. It was messy and loud and alive. Flyers in 3 languages papered the walls. The waiting room always smelled like spiced tea and printer ink. People came in with stories that didn't fit on forms. And I made coffee. Sometimes I helped with translation. Spanish to English, English to maybe. My Spanish wasn't perfect, but good enough to catch the panic in people's voices, the weight behind their words. Good enough to tell a man in torn boots, "You're safe here." They called me Mia. It wasn't my name, but it was the one I gave. It fit like an old coat. Functional, unremarkable, safe. Within months, I was doing more than pouring coffee and stacking folders. I started staying late to help with intake interviews. I sat beside asylum seekers and domestic workers, typing every detail they whispered like it might vanish if we didn't catch it fast enough. I asked questions carefully, gently, the ones no one wanted to say out loud. Did he ever hit you in front of the children? Do you have a copy of your visa, even if it's expired? I read case files like they were scripture. At night, I printed out immigration law PDFs and highlighted them until the ink bled through. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with legal codes echoing in my head. It wasn't glamorous, it was slow and dense and deeply human. And I loved it. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost taking up space. I wasn't disposable. I was the girl they called when the printer broke, when the affidavit deadline loomed, when the grant proposal needed a last-minute rewrite. They started giving me real responsibility. I co-wrote our refugee housing proposal. I secured funding from a grassroots education initiative. I presented a small project, Access for All, to a city rep, and they approved it within a week. And still, no one knew my name. Sometimes Liana would say, half joking, "You know, we still don't have your ID on file. What's your story, Mia?" I'd just smile and say, "It's boring." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. The truth was, I wasn't ready to be her again. Not the girl who cried herself to sleep on her sister's floor. Not the one who stood shaking while her father erased her with words. Not the girl from the video. Chloe. That name was still radioactive in my mouth. It hummed with humiliation and shame. I couldn't wear it yet, maybe never. I didn't know who I was now, but I knew who I wasn't. One night after a meeting, I stayed behind to file intake reports. The office was quiet except for the hum of the copy machine. A young boy wandered in, 6, maybe 7, his mother asleep on the waiting room bench. He sat beside me, swinging his legs. "What's your name?" he asked, too tired to be shy. I hesitated. "Mia," I said. He frowned. "That's not your real name." "No," I said softly, "but it's the one I use right now." He nodded like that made perfect sense. Kids understand secrets better than adults. They live with them every day. By the time winter rolled in, my name was on project proposals, funding documents, and campaign materials. Always just M. Carter. People respected me. Volunteers looked up to me. Clients thanked me. The city council called our office asking for her, the one who wrote the housing reform letter. No one asked about my past, and I didn't offer it, because I wasn't ready to be Chloe. Not yet. But every day I felt a little closer. I never intended to run for office. I didn't dream about it as a child. I didn't scribble it in diaries or imagine speeches from podiums. In fact, the thought of standing in front of strangers, saying anything with my name attached to it, used to make my skin crawl. But sometimes, a storm comes, and you don't realize you're already inside it until someone shoves a lightning rod into your hands. That someone was Maria Torres. She walked into my office like she owned the building. Her red lipstick perfect, her earrings loud, her steps louder. She didn't sit. She just dropped a folder onto my desk and said, "You should run." I blinked. "Run?" "What?" "For city council," she said, arms crossed. "District 4. I laughed like she'd told a joke. But Maria didn't joke about things like justice. "You're smart, you're trusted, and you know how the system works without being owned by it," she continued. "People like you don't just show up, and when they do, we don't let them disappear." I didn't say yes. Not at first. I sat with it for weeks, turning it over in my mind like a shard of glass. I'd built something good, real, honest work. Did I want to put it under a spotlight? Did I want the world to ask questions? Did I want to risk being known? Because that was the truth. I wasn't. Not really. I was Mia Carter, the girl who helped everyone and explained nothing. No one knew about the dorm, the burned notebook, the bus ticket. No one knew what it meant when I twitched at the sound of a camera shutter. No one asked why I flinched when someone said family, and I didn't offer. But then I thought of Rosa, of the boy who called me out for using a name that wasn't mine, of the woman who cried when I translated her deportation letter into something she could understand. I thought of every face that looked to me with hope, not because I was whole, but because I showed up. So one day, I walked into Maria's office, pulled the campaign folder back across the desk, and said, "Fine, but I'm doing it my way." There were rules I made clear from the start. No biography, no glossy photo spreads, no sob story about a fallen girl finding her feet. This would not be a campaign about survival. It would be about competence. I didn't want sympathy, I wanted policies. My campaign materials were painfully plain: gray-blue background, sharp sans serif font, and one line of text. "M.C. Carter for District 4. Below it, "Let the work speak." That was it. No slogans about faith or family values. No daughter of a small-town dream. No, my mother taught me strength, lies. Because my mother taught me silence, and my sister taught me betrayal, and my father taught me how to disappear. None of those belonged on a campaign banner. I built my platform the way I built my life, from the margins inward. Housing equity, public legal aid, protection for undocumented tenants, youth access to mental health care, civilian oversight of local law enforcement, the kind of ideas that weren't sexy or viral, but necessary. My opponents scoffed. She won't even tell us where she's from. She's not married, no kids, no roots. She's hiding something. And they were right. I was hiding something. Not because I was ashamed anymore, but because I deserved the right to move forward without dragging the carcass of my past behind me for the press to pick apart. My campaign had no history because I had already buried it, and I was not about to dig it up for votes. The first debate was a nightmare. My hands trembled behind the podium. I could feel sweat dripping down my spine. The bright lights made me feel like I was on trial again, and for a split second, I saw my father's face, tight-lipped, glaring. But then the moderator asked a question about tenant protections, and instinct took over. I spoke clearly, slowly, with numbers and case studies and bills I had helped write. My voice cracked once, but no one cared, because I knew my shit, and I made people listen. A week later, a mother from the neighborhood stopped me outside a grocery store. "You're the one who helped Rosa, right?" she asked, balancing two toddlers on either side. I nodded, unsure what to say. She smiled. "You don't need a story, just keep doing what you're doing." I didn't cry. Not in front of her. But when I got home, I closed the door and let the tears fall into my empty sink. Because for the first time in years, I was seen. Not for what had been taken from me, but for what I'd built on the ashes. My real name never appeared on a single piece of campaign literature. Not because I was hiding, but because I was becoming. And when people filled in that bubble next to M. Carter on the ballot, they weren't voting for a survivor. They were voting for a professional. The courtroom smelled like old paper and recycled air, sharp, cold, sterile. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in black slacks and a soft, nondescript blouse. No makeup, no jewelry. My hair pulled back, not as a statement, just as a habit. No one noticed me at first. Just another quiet face in the wooden pews. But when the clerk read the name Allison Harrington, the room shifted. Heads turned, murmurs sparked. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just stared ahead as my sister stepped into the defendant's box, wrists trembling at her sides. She looked older, or maybe smaller. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 years. Not since the night she texted our father that video. The night she decided preserving our family's image was more important than preserving me. Now she stood before a judge, charged with obstruction of justice and tampering with digital evidence. She had tried to erase someone else's mistakes, or at least make it look like they never happened. But in doing so, she destroyed timestamps, wiped data, crossed legal lines even her privilege couldn't erase. The irony wasn't lost on me. She exposed me to the world to protect an illusion, and now she was exposed too. My mother was in the second row, her posture rigid, hands clutched around a handkerchief, like it might stop her from falling apart. My father wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He never showed up when things got messy, unless he was the one delivering the punishment. But my presence? That was the earthquake. When I walked in and quietly sat in the back, I saw heads whip around like strings had been pulled. My mother gasped. My sister's lawyer went pale. Even the prosecutor did a double take. And Allison? She saw me. She saw me. And for a moment, her lips parted, like she might say my name, like it was still hers to speak. But I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just watched. I never said a word. I didn't take the stand. I wasn't called to testify. I wasn't even on the witness list. But my silence echoed through that courtroom like thunder. Because everyone knew who I was. The girl from that scandal. The girl who vanished. The girl whose name no longer appeared in family Christmas letters. The liability. The disgrace. Only now, I wasn't a ghost anymore. Now I was a woman in a clean blazer, with a posture that didn't bend. A woman whose campaign signs still fluttered down the streets outside. A woman whose silence wasn't shame. It was power. And Allison? She couldn't look at me after that first glance. Her eyes kept flicking toward mine, as if hoping for a nod, a tear, some sign of forgiveness. But I gave her nothing, not cruelty, not comfort, just presence. And that was enough to gut her. The judge called a recess. The reporters whispered. The cameras snapped. I stood up. No one stopped me. No one dared. I walked out of the courtroom, down the echoing hallway, and into the spring sun like a verdict had already been passed. Not by the judge, but by the truth. For years, my family said I had failed. But today, it wasn't me on trial. And I didn't need to say a single word to make that clear. It started like all ambushes do, without warning. A blurry thumbnail buried halfway down a newsfeed. My face, years younger, shadowed in confusion, cropped from a video I never wanted the world to see. City council candidate caught in past scandal, leaked tape reemerges. I didn't click on it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it was. The video. That video. The one that destroyed my first life. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Local tabloids resurrected their old archives. Pundits clutched their pearls while pretending to be just asking questions. Podcasts made it their hot topic of the week. Do we want someone like that writing housing laws? Is this someone our children should look up to? One YouTube commentator, whose followers used anime avatars and called women females like it was an insult, paused frame by frame to analyze my expressions, my posture, my choices, my sin. But the crown jewel? Jake, my ex, the boy who stole something sacred and sold it for clout. He gave a live interview on a podcast called Unfiltered Truths. His voice was deeper now, but it was still smug, still slippery. We were both young, he said, flashing that same fake humility he used when cheating on me in high school. We were in love. And look, I didn't mean for it to go public, but she never said to delete it, you know? He smirked. He smirked. Like the crime was funny. Like the pain was mutual. Like the world owed him the right to rewrite the story he started, and I had to live through. My inbox imploded. Supporters wanted guidance. The board wanted spin. Maria, always fire, always fierce, wanted vengeance. We get out ahead of this, she said, her fists clenched, eyes glowing. We write a statement. We threaten a lawsuit. No, I said. Her mouth opened to argue, but I held up a hand. I've been through this once, I said quietly. I can go through it again. I didn't run from the headlines. I walked into them, not with a press conference or a tearful appeal to empathy, not with a rebranding campaign or a new logo. I just kept showing up. To community meetings, to legal clinics, to schools where girls asked me how to file voter registration cards, and boys sat silent when I walked in. I didn't shrink, because I had already been reduced to nothing once, and I had rebuilt from the dust. There was no further down to go. Then, my father called. I stared at the name on the screen, Dad, like it was a message from a ghost. I hadn't heard from him in over 2 years. Not since the campaign launched. Not since I became someone who mattered. Still, I answered. You know what you're doing to us? He said. No greeting, just bitterness, stale and practiced. You're dragging our name through the mud. Again. I closed my eyes. That word, our, tasted like rust in his mouth, as if he had ever carried me. I exhaled once, slowly, then said, I carried that name longer than you ever carried me. Silence. He didn't respond, didn't apologize, just hung up. And for the first time in my life, the silence felt like victory. I didn't defend myself, because there was nothing to defend. What happened to me wasn't a mistake I made. It was a violation I endured. And yet somehow, I was the one expected to wear it forever, like a name tag I never chose. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. I wasn't interested in redemption arcs that demanded blood. If the world couldn't handle a woman who didn't beg for forgiveness for being wronged, that wasn't my crisis to fix. Something strange happened next. The backlash didn't bury me. It lifted me. Women I'd never met messaged me. Thank you for not flinching. I lived through the same thing. I've never seen someone just stand still and survive like that. Men, the ones who had grown, reposted the podcast clip and called Jake out by name. One tweet went viral. If your standard for leadership is must never have been exploited, then you're really just saying must have never been vulnerable. And suddenly, I wasn't the girl in the video anymore. I was the woman who didn't bow. The next town hall was packed. A moderator asked if I had anything to say about the renewed controversy. I looked straight into the camera. No, I said. My past is not a platform. It's not a selling point. It's not shame. It's just mine. And if you care more about a video taken without my consent than the housing crisis in this district, then I am not your candidate. A pause, a heartbeat, and then applause. Not orchestrated, not polite, earnest. Because maybe people were done watching women be burned for their resilience. Maybe we were finally allowed to stand in the fire and stay whole. The phone rang at 3:14 a.m. Not an email, not a text, a call. The number was familiar. Emily, my cousin. I stared at it for a few seconds, blinking sleep from my eyes, the ceiling fan above me humming like an old whisper. When I finally picked up, her voice was thick, like she'd been crying or rehearsing. Chloe, I'm sorry to call so late. It's your mom. She's in the hospital. Heart issue, they said. Not a heart attack, but it's not nothing. I sat up slowly, the weight in my chest returning like it never left. She's okay now? I asked. She's stable. Discharged this afternoon. But she asked about you. Dad said you should come for dinner. They want to talk. Those words felt like smoke. Hard to trust, easy to choke on. They want to talk. They want something. I hadn't been in that house in 3 years. Not since I walked out with a single backpack and more shame than skin. But as I pulled into the circular driveway, memories unspooled around me like tripwires. The hydrangeas I used to water, the window where I'd sit and write, the porch where my father once scolded me for wearing lipstick at 13. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. I stood at the door for a long time before I knocked. Emily answered. Her face softened with relief. Or was it guilt? She hugged me awkwardly, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed. Inside, the house was pristine, polished, prepared. Dinner was already set. Linen napkins, china plates, wine glasses sparkling under the chandelier. It was a set piece, not a meal. At the center of it sat my father, arms folded across his chest like a king waiting for court to begin. Allison sat beside him, eyes flicking down as soon as they met mine. And my mother, she sat upright in her robe, cheeks pale, lips stretched in the ghost of a smile. A painting of domestic warmth. It felt like a trap. We're glad you came, my mother said, voice fragile. I nodded, said nothing. We thought, my father added, that maybe it was time. Time for what? I asked. To talk, he said, to reconcile. I took the empty seat across from Allison, the one I always sat in growing up, the furthest from warmth, closest to scrutiny. There was food, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, herbed green beans, the dishes I used to love, the ones Mom used to make when people came over, when appearances mattered. That's when I realized, this wasn't about healing, this was theater. Every napkin folded, every dish placed, my sister in a modest blouse and light makeup, my mother carefully styled despite her condition. This wasn't a dinner. This was a scene. They made small talk first. About the weather, about the new neighbors, about some former classmate of mine who got married and had twins. Then came the pivot. I heard you're meeting with the State Housing Board next month, my father said. Very impressive. Allison cleared her throat softly. And your speech on youth access to mental health? It was moving. Thank you, I said flatly. A long pause. Then, you're doing really well for yourself, Chloe. I let that sit there for a moment. Then I said, you didn't invite me here to compliment my career. My father bristled. We invited you because your mother was in the hospital. And because Allison is facing a federal investigation, I added. Silence. Cold, sharp silence. Allison looked like she might cry. Mom reached for her glass. Her hand trembled. I set my fork down. My voice was steady. Not angry, not sad. Just final. If I weren't governor, would you have called me? No one spoke. Not a sound. Not even a breath. Allison looked down at her plate like it might save her. My mother looked away. And my father? He didn't flinch. But he didn't answer either. Because we all knew the truth. They hadn't invited me home. They had summoned a tool. I stood, folded my napkin with care, and placed it beside the plate. Walked to the door with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already survived their worst night here. No one followed. Not even my mother. Outside, the air smelled like spring, like rain-soaked soil and fresh starts. I stood on the front steps for a moment and looked back at the house. It had never been a home. Not really. Just a place where I learned how deeply a person could feel unwanted. But not anymore. Now it was just an address I didn't need to remember. They wanted a savior. They got a reckoning. And I would not carry their silence anymore. It began that night. The threats. First, a manila envelope slipped beneath the door of my campaign office. No return address. No handwriting. Inside, grainy photographs. Screenshots of old messages. Out of context. Some from high school. One was of me at a party, blurred and laughing, a drink in my hand. Another, a cropped image of me leaving a motel when I was still sleeping in borrowed cars and showering at bus stations. My eyes were downcast, my clothes baggy. I looked like a statistic. A note was paper-clipped to the stack. Still think you're clean enough for office? I didn't flinch. Then came the emails, leaked threads from when I first joined the NGO, informal messages, private frustrations, selectively edited, naturally. And the implication was clear. She's not who you think she is. Some of them hinted at more to come. One included a scanned copy of an old juvenile record. Nothing criminal, just a school incident I barely remembered. By morning, the local blogosphere had it all. The hashtags were back. The whispers grew louder. Is this the real M. Carter? Lying by omission is still lying. If she can't be honest about her past, what else is she hiding? But this time, I didn't disappear. I called a press conference, not to defend myself, to propose legislation. The chamber was full. Reporters, city officials, advocates, some looking for spectacle, some looking for blood. But I wasn't afraid. I stood behind the podium, looked every camera in the eye, and said, "We don't get to choose the families we're born into, but we get to choose the legacies we build." I paused. Let that sink in. Many of you know that I have a complicated relationship with my past. What you might not know is that in recent days, I've received threats. Not just to my image, but to my livelihood, my integrity. These threats came from individuals who believe they can manipulate public servants by exploiting private pain. I held up a copy of the proposed bill. This is the Public Integrity Protection Act. It prohibits attempts by family members, spouses, or personal affiliates to use private influence, coercion, or threats to manipulate public officials. This includes emotional blackmail, the threat of public defamation, or attempts to sabotage decision-making through familial pressure. I looked straight at the press. This isn't about revenge. This is about resilience, about drawing a line between blood and power, about reminding people, especially women, that surviving something doesn't disqualify you. It prepares you. The room was silent. Then came applause. Not all at once. Not from everyone. But it grew. It grew. Not because I played victim, but because I didn't. That night, someone sent one last photo. A blurry image of me at 17, crying in the back of a car. No message, no caption. Just a girl they thought I still was. I looked at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Because that girl was brave. She survived what should have destroyed her. But I am not her anymore. I am more. And from now on, I wouldn't just survive the system, I would rewrite it, one bill at a time. She came alone. No lawyer, no press, no dramatic arrival. Just a knock at my office door on a Thursday morning when the rain tapped gently on the windows and the phones hadn't started ringing yet. Allison. She looked small, not broken, not pathetic, just finely stripped of the armor she had worn for most of her life. I didn't speak. I stepped aside. She entered. We didn't sit. We didn't exchange pleasantries. We didn't pretend. She stood in front of my desk, the desk I had built from volunteer hours and policy papers and the wreckage of the woman she once helped cast out. And for the first time in years, she didn't wear her usual mask. I lied, she said, voice raw, about everything. I said nothing. I was jealous, she continued, eyes locked on mine. You were always smarter, quieter. People listened to you without you even trying. I hated it. She swallowed. And when the video came out, I told myself I was protecting the family. But I wasn't. I was protecting me. I wanted to be the good daughter, the strong one, the one Dad didn't yell at. I leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, still silent. I know what I did, she said. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just wanted you to hear it from me, that I see it now. I see you. And there it was. Not a performance, not a plea, just recognition. I took a long breath, then said slowly, You didn't destroy me, Allison. She blinked. You just forgot that I exist. And I learned to be unforgettable. We stood there for a long moment, two women with the same last name and nothing else left in common. No tears, no hugs, no rehearsed closure, just a silence so honest it felt sacred. She nodded once, turned, and left. I watched the door click shut behind her, and for the first time since I was thrown out of that house, I felt it. Not triumph. Just peace. I had nothing to prove, because she finally saw me, and I never needed her to understand what she destroyed. I only needed her to know that I endured it. And I rose. The stage lights were softer than I expected. Not blinding, not harsh, just warm, like the dawn through an old window pane. The room was packed, rows and rows of faces, some familiar, many not. Community organizers, lawmakers, survivors, journalists, young women with notebooks on their knees, older men who crossed their arms until they heard a woman speak and then slowly uncrossed them. Behind me, the screen read, The Public Kinship Act, Recognizing Chosen Truths. And below it, in bold, unapologetic font, Chloe Harrington, Governor, Advocate, Survivor. For the first time, the name didn't make my stomach twist. For the first time, I stood in front of that name and didn't feel the urge to run. I stepped to the microphone, and I began. I never planned to tell this story. Pause. I didn't think I needed to. I thought the work would be enough. The audience leaned in. But some stories don't vanish when you bury them. They grow, they wait. And eventually, you realize the only way to own your story is to speak it aloud, in your voice, not the one the world tried to give you. I looked out and saw a girl in the third row nodding, eyes wet. I kept going. When I was 18, an intimate video of me was leaked by someone I trusted. It was shared without my consent. Not just by strangers, but by family. My sister sent it to my father. He threw me out of the house. My mother didn't speak. A collective intake of breath. My name became a headline, a warning, a disgrace. I slept in a friend's car, burned my childhood journal on the side of a highway. I left behind everything, not out of courage, but because I had no choice. A pause. But that was not the end of the story. I walked them through it. Denver. The dorm with the cracked window. The 3 jobs. The data entry. The girl who lied and said her name was Mia, the clinic, Rosa, the lie that saved her. The moment someone finally said, "You're not invisible," I told them about the coffee making, the grant writing, the silence that became voice. And finally, the first time I stood in a courtroom, and the only weapon I had was my presence. "My name wasn't a weapon anymore," I said. "It was a monument." Then I introduced the bill, the Public Kinship Act, a piece of legislation that allows individuals, especially public servants, to formally declare estrangement from abusive or coercive family relationships without legal disadvantage or social penalty. It recognizes that blood isn't always bond, that survival sometimes means stepping away, and that healing can begin with being believed. The crowd stood, not all at once, but like a wave gaining courage. Some cried, some clapped, some just stared, holding their hearts. Afterward, a reporter asked me, "Was it hard to share that today?" I smiled. "No," I said, because for the first time, I said it as myself. And when I turned to walk off the stage, someone in the back stood up and whispered, "Chloe." Just my name. Nothing more. But it didn't sting anymore. It sang, because I had taken it back. And now, it belonged to me. I was mid-sentence when I saw him. The spotlight blurred the first few rows, but something about the stillness in that seat in the back pulled my eyes. He wasn't leaning forward. He wasn't fidgeting. He sat like a statue, upright, reserved, and impossibly familiar. My father. I didn't stop speaking. I didn't stutter. But my heart, traitorous as always, thundered once in my chest. He hadn't changed much. His hair was thinner, the suit a little more worn. But the presence was the same, rigid, cold, heavy like old stone. For a brief, disorienting second, I was 17 again, standing in the hallway outside his office, waiting for him to decide who I was allowed to be. But the microphone in my hand grounded me. The applause that followed reminded me of where I was, who I had become. So I finished the talk. No tremor in my voice, no deviation in my pace. I spoke about policy, about autonomy, about the right to cut ties when blood becomes a shackle instead of a bond. And I didn't once say his name. When the Q&A ended, people began moving toward the exits. A few stayed to shake my hand, to thank me, to say, I needed to hear that. I was halfway through thanking a social worker from Aurora when I heard it. The soft click of a microphone being turned back on. A voice, unfamiliar at first, not because I didn't recognize it, but because I had never heard it in public, without anger, without judgment. My father stood at the podium. He didn't ask permission. He didn't look at me. He looked at the room. And then he said, I didn't understand my daughter. The room went quiet. Even the air held still. She wasn't what I expected. She wasn't who I was trying to raise. He swallowed once. I had a picture in my head of discipline, order, obedience, and when she didn't fit into that, I thought the fault was hers. A pause. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. But I was wrong. He drew a breath. She did something I never could. She faced the world after being broken by it, and then she rebuilt, with no support, no map, no father to back her up. He looked down at his hands for a moment, and then, I didn't raise her to be this strong, but she became that in spite of me. He stepped away from the microphone without waiting for applause. There wasn't any. Not because the room didn't care, but because no one knew what to do with that kind of honesty. Especially from a man like him. He didn't come up to me afterward, didn't offer a hug or an apology. He simply nodded once from across the room, the way people do when they pass a stranger they almost recognize but can't place. And I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I didn't let my hands shake, because he wasn't the mountain anymore. He was just a man who saw me, finally. Not as a cautionary tale, not as a broken daughter, but as a truth he could no longer deny. Recognition isn't redemption, but it is a beginning, and for someone like me, Someone discarded, silenced, rewritten. That beginning was everything. Not a hand reaching out to pull me back, but a voice, too late but honest, admitting, "She did what I couldn't." And that was enough. She stepped outside alone, the cold bit at her cheeks, a sharp living thing. Snow fell in slow spirals, catching in her hair, clinging to her coat. It was the kind of snow that quiets everything, that makes the world feel paused, suspended between moments. She didn't flinch. She didn't shiver. She welcomed the stillness. For the first time in her life, Chloe wasn't walking out into the cold as someone abandoned, exiled, or forgotten. She was walking out whole. The building behind her, the town hall, the conference room, the podium, it would always be just bricks and steel. But tonight, it held something sacred. A moment where the truth lived aloud. A moment where she stood under her own name and didn't flinch when it echoed back. She remembered being 17, face pressed to a frosted window, watching snow fall while her father's voice called her disgrace from the next room. She remembered being 19, lighting a match to a notebook filled with childhood recipes and family birthdays she was no longer invited to. She remembered years of being silent, so she wouldn't seem difficult, dramatic, weak. But that girl, she wasn't here anymore. The woman standing in the snow now didn't shrink. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for space. She took it. Chloe Harrington. That name once tasted like iron and shame. It once curled on the tongues of reporters, judgmental aunts, old classmates with too much time and not enough empathy. But now it stood on legislative drafts, on grassroots banners, on the lips of survivors who said, "If she can speak, so can I." She hadn't erased her past. She had rewritten the ending. The Harrington name didn't belong to her father anymore, or her sister, or anyone who had used it to silence her. It belonged to her, because she had dragged it through fire and mud, and night after night of doubt, and she had made it mean something. She turned her face toward the sky. Let the snow fall. Let the world keep spinning. She wasn't a child waiting for recognition. She wasn't a girl begging to be loved in the right way, at the right volume. She was a lawmaker, a breaker of patterns, a woman who walked through exile and returned with truth. And every step she took now carved a path no one else had dared to map. Not out of vengeance, but out of purpose, out of ethics, out of choice. When the wind picked up, she smiled. Let it. Let the world throw everything it had at her. She was no longer fragile. She was no longer afraid. And her name? It didn't haunt her anymore. It stood behind her. Because she had made it mean something new. Something no one else had the power to define.